Have you ever overheard something you were never meant to hear, and that conversation ended up changing your life forever? Michael, a wealthy man from Austin, Texas, never imagined that a few words overheard by chance, spoken by a housekeeper, would mark a turning point in his life. He was used to the silence of his spacious residence in Austin, to long, empty nights. But that evening, as he passed near the kitchen, he heard something that left him completely frozen in place. And before we continue, drop a comment below and let us know where you're tuning in from. We love knowing how far our stories reach. I need a boyfriend for tomorrow. Emily's voice cracked as she spoke on the phone, unaware that someone was listening. Stay until the end to discover how an unexpected favor turned into a love story no one could have imagined. Meanwhile, Michael walked through the hallways of his home like a shadow, as if he were a stranger in his own kingdom. At 45 years old, he had built a successful business empire that many people envied. Yet every night he returned to a massive house where the echo of his footsteps was his only company. The wide walls, elegant furniture, and carefully chosen artwork seemed to mock him with their cold perfection. He had achieved everything, except the one thing that truly mattered: someone to share his life with. His success had given him money, power, and respect in Austin, but it had also taken something from him that he did not realize he had lost until it was far too late. Social events were nothing more than obligations where he pretended to smile and exchanged small talk he forgot before he even made it home. His employees kept the professional distance that he himself had imposed years earlier, when he decided that building emotional walls felt safer than facing disappointment. Emily was the only one who had been working for him for 3 years. Always discreet, efficient, almost invisible, she took care of every detail to avoid bothering him. That Tuesday night, Michael was going downstairs thinking about reviewing some documents in his home office when something unexpected stopped him completely. Emily's voice came from the kitchen, muted and trembling, very different from the professional tone she used with him. Michael stood still in the hallway. He did not want to eavesdrop, but he could not bring himself to keep walking. He immediately recognized the sound of someone trying to hold back tears while talking on the phone. It was that mix of desperation and shame that appears when life backs you into a corner with no way out. Her words came out broken, loaded with an anguish that seemed to pass through the walls like a silent cry for help. Michael had never heard Emily like this. Vulnerable. Human. Real. For 3 years, she had simply been the woman who kept his house in order, who cooked his meals and cleaned quietly, disappearing whenever he arrived. But that broken voice showed him that Emily was not just an efficient employee, but a person with problems, fears, and a life he had never stopped to understand. Curiosity pulled him closer, just enough to hear her words more clearly, without being seen. He felt like he was invading something private, almost sacred, yet his feet refused to move away. What he heard next hit him hard, like someone who had forgotten what it felt like to need something more than money. Emily's voice sounded clear, desperate, impossible to ignore. "I know it sounds crazy, Sarah, but I need it. I need a boyfriend for tomorrow." Michael felt the air leave his lungs as he processed what he had just heard. A boyfriend for tomorrow. The phrase sounded absurd, almost like something out of a cheap Saturday afternoon movie. But there was nothing funny about Emily's tone, nor about the way her words trembled as they left her mouth. Michael leaned against the hallway wall, hidden in the shadows, trying to understand what kind of situation could drive someone to ask for something like that. Emily kept talking, now with even more urgency. She explained every detail of her problem to her friend, like someone confessing a burden she could no longer carry alone. Michael listened with a level of attention he did not even give during his most important business meetings. There was something about that raw vulnerability that kept him there, unable to leave, unable to pretend he had heard nothing. Something without a price or a strategy. Something that made him feel strangely alive. He wondered how many times Emily had gone through moments like this. How many nights she had cried in silence while he locked himself in his office, reviewing lifeless numbers. Guilt began to rise in his throat like a vine of thorns. Emily kept talking to her friend, and with every word, a window opened into a world Michael had completely ignored. She explained that her younger sister's wedding would be the next day. A family event planned for 6 months, where the whole family was expected to be present. The problem wasn't the wedding itself, but the condition her family had placed on her in order to go. It wasn't malice, Emily said between sobs. It was just tradition. Her family was the kind that still believed in those ideas. To them, a 35-year-old woman without a partner was a cause for worry, for hushed comments, and for looks filled with pity. Michael clenched his fists as he heard that. He felt an unexpected anger toward people he didn't even know, but who were causing so much pain to someone who worked for him. Emily continued, explaining that her mother was sick. She said the doctors didn't give her much time and that this wedding could be the last occasion when the whole family was together. All her mother wanted, everything she had asked with the weak voice of someone who could no longer ask for much, was to see her happy, accompanied by someone who would care for her. The irony of the situation was harsh. Emily had to pretend to be happy to give comfort to her sick mother. She had to lie about having love in order to show true love. Michael felt something stir deep in his chest. It was a strange feeling, something he hadn't felt in a long time, something whose name he had almost forgotten: empathy. The call continued, but now Emily spoke more quietly, as if shame weighed more than desperation. She told her friend Sarah that she had thought of all the possible options. She had considered canceling, inventing an excuse, or simply not showing up and letting her sister have a perfect day without complications. But she couldn't do it. She said it in a broken voice, because her mother had begged her to go, because she wanted to see her smiling, because perhaps it would be the last time they could all be together as a family. Emily admitted that she had already asked that favor of 2 acquaintances, but both had refused. They said it was too strange, uncomfortable, and complicated. Michael listened to every detail, feeling something inside him begin to awaken after years of dormancy. Too much time had passed functioning like a machine, making decisions based only on numbers and strategy, and he had forgotten what it felt like to be moved by something human and visceral. Emily ended the call promising that she would find a solution, though her voice sounded defeated, like someone promising the impossible just to end a painful conversation. Michael heard the sound of the phone hanging up and then a stifled sob that she tried to hold back. He stayed in that dark hallway, processing everything he had just heard, feeling the weight of a decision he didn't yet know he was about to make. Something had changed in those minutes of involuntary listening. Something that would make that night different from all the empty nights of his life. Michael couldn't move from the hallway, as if his $2,360 Italian shoes were nailed to the marble floor. He heard Emily's footsteps in the kitchen and the sound of water running. She was probably washing her face to wipe away her tears before finishing her duties. He knew he should leave, go back to his home office, and pretend he had heard nothing, letting Emily deal with her problems like responsible adults do. But something kept him there. An invisible force he couldn't name, but that seemed to press against his chest. For 3 years, Emily had been part of the background of his life, as present as the furniture, but just as impersonal. He had never asked her about her family, her dreams, or her fears. He had never looked beyond the efficient housekeeper who made his world function without complications. And now, within minutes, that invisible woman had become painfully real. She had complex problems and emotions that Michael had forgotten even existed. He ran a hand through his hair, messing it up for the first time that day, with a strange urgency to do something, anything, to stop that contained crying from echoing in his head. It wasn't empty compassion nor arrogant charity. It was something deeper, even more selfish. It was the recognition of a pain he knew all too well himself. Emily stepped out of the kitchen drying her hands on her apron. Her eyes were red, but she tried to regain the professional composure she always showed. She did not expect to find anyone in the hallway at that hour, and much less Michael, standing still like a statue. Their eyes met, and time seemed to stop in that corridor lit only by the faint glow of the night. Emily's eyes opened wide in horror as she realized he had been close enough to hear her private conversation, her most embarrassing moment of vulnerability. The color drained from her face, leaving her pale, as if the floor were about to swallow her whole. Michael saw the panic in her eyes. It was the fear of someone who realizes she has revealed too much in front of the wrong person, of someone who knows she has crossed that invisible line separating the professional from the personal. Emily took a step back. Her hands trembled as she searched for words to explain the unexplainable, to undo something that could no longer be taken back. Michael raised a hand in a calm gesture, fully aware that any word at that moment could make her run away or completely break down. He had to handle the situation carefully, with a delicacy he rarely used in his daily interactions with others. The air between them was heavy with discomfort, with unspoken words and secrets exposed without permission. "Mr. Michael, I'm so sorry, I shouldn't have." Emily began to apologize in a broken voice. Her words tumbled over each other in a desperate attempt to explain herself. But Michael shook his head and stopped her before she could build a wall of unnecessary apologies. In that instant, he understood that he had two choices. He could do what he always did, keep a professional distance, pretend he hadn't heard anything, and let each person deal with their problems in private. Or he could do something different, something that frightened him precisely because it came without instructions or a clear way out. Emily looked at him with pleading eyes. She wasn't asking for help, only begging him to forget what he had heard and allow her to keep her dignity and her job. Michael noticed the fine lines around her eyes, signs of sleepless nights and constant worries he had never seen because, in truth, he had never really looked. He also noticed her hands, rough from work, her nails short and unpolished, the slight curve of her posture, as if she carried invisible weights every day. Emily was not just an employee. She was a whole woman, with a life full of responsibilities and pain he had completely ignored. Now that reality stood in front of him, impossible to avoid, asking him for some kind of response. "You don't have to apologize, Emily. I'm the one who overheard it by accident," Michael said in a much softer voice than usual, very different from the firm tone he used in his offices. She blinked, confused, unsure how to interpret that unexpected kindness in a man who had always been correct, but distant. Michael understood that he needed to give her space, to let her decide how much she wanted to share without feeling forced or judged. He leaned against the wall, adopting a less intimidating posture, less like a boss and more like an equal, even though they both knew their relationship would never be completely balanced. Emily took a deep breath and wiped away a stubborn tear that refused to fall. Despite her effort to keep her composure, she lowered her gaze, unable to meet his eyes, as if speaking about her situation meant admitting an unforgivable weakness. Then, with a trembling but steady voice, she began to explain what Michael had already heard, but needed to hear directly from her. She spoke about her sister Sophie's wedding, the youngest of 4 sisters, the only one who, according to her family's unspoken rules, had been lucky in love. She explained that her parents were people from the countryside, from families where old traditions still shaped everyday life. There, a 35-year-old woman without a husband was seen as a silent failure that everyone noticed but no one mentioned out loud. As she spoke, her words flowed more easily, as if they had been trapped for too long, waiting to be released. She said that her other sisters were married and had children, with lives her mother considered complete and blessed. She, on the other hand, had chosen a different path. She had gone to Austin, Texas years earlier to look for work after her father fell ill, and since then had been sending money home regularly to help with medical expenses and the needs of her nieces and nephews. She had put her own personal life aside for the well-being of her family. She worked long hours, saved every dollar she could, and gave up going out, relationships, and the idea of starting her own family. And now, with her younger sister about to get married and her sick mother wishing to see them all together one last time, she couldn't show up alone and face those looks filled with pity. The comments disguised as concern. The uncomfortable questions about why she was still single. It wasn't vanity, she said firmly. It was emotional survival. It was protecting her mother from the anguish of believing her eldest daughter was alone and unprotected in a large, dangerous city. Michael listened to every word as the simple image he had of his housekeeper's life completely fell apart. Emily was not just the woman who cleaned his house and cooked his meals. She was a daughter who sent money to her family regularly, a sister who wanted to see Sophie happy without ruining her day with her own loneliness, a woman carrying impossible expectations on her tired shoulders. And Michael, for the first time in many years, wondered how many times he had walked past other people's pain without noticing, locked inside his bubble of privilege and chosen solitude. When Emily finished speaking, the silence that settled between them was so dense it seemed to take up physical space, like an invisible wall that could not be crossed. She expected some kind of reaction, perhaps a reprimand for mixing personal matters with work, or worse, that false compassion wealthy people sometimes offer, as if tossing coins. But Michael remained silent. His expression was one Emily couldn't decipher, something between surprise and deep reflection. His eyes, usually cold and calculating in business matters, now showed an unexpected warmth that unsettled her more than any possible reproach. Emily wrapped her arms around herself, feeling the chill of the night slip in through the windows and mix with the cold of her exposed vulnerability. She had never shared so much of her personal life with anyone in that house. Now she regretted every word, every detail she had revealed. She wished she could go back, return to the moment before the phone rang, before desperation made her lower her guard in front of the man who paid her salary. But time does not move backward, and once spoken, words cannot be taken back. All that remained was to wait for the consequence of her imprudence. To brace herself for whatever came next, pity, indifference, or dismissal. Michael finally moved. He straightened away from the wall and took a step toward her. It was not a threatening gesture, but a careful one, like someone approaching an injured person without wanting to frighten them further. "Is your mother very sick?" Michael asked with a softness Emily had never heard from him before. His voice held no authority, only genuine curiosity. The question caught her off guard, not because it was inappropriate, but because it was too human to come from a man accustomed to superficial conversations about the weather or food. Emily nodded. She felt the tears threaten to return despite her effort to hold them back. She explained that her mother had heart problems, that the doctors in her town did not give her more than 6 months, that each day could be the last, and that was why every family moment had become precious and impossible to replace. Michael listened with such deep attention that Emily could feel the weight of his gaze. It was not a look of judgment, but of real interest, as if every word mattered. Maybe, she thought with surprise, he truly did care. There was something in the way he tilted his head and kept his hands still in his pockets, without checking the time or his phone, that conveyed complete presence, something Emily had not felt in a very long time. It was as if, for the first time in 3 years, Michael was truly seeing her. Not as the employee who folded his clothes or made his coffee, but as a person with complex stories and deep pain. "And your family won't accept you going to the wedding alone," he said, not as a question, but as a statement, organizing out loud everything he had heard. Emily shook her head. She felt ridiculous admitting it, yet at the same time relieved to finally speak honestly about something that had consumed her for weeks. She explained that her father was a man of firm customs, the kind who believed that a woman without a partner was like a tree without roots, exposed to any storm. It wasn't cruelty, Emily clarified right away. It was simply the way he had been raised, the only reality he knew. Her mother shared those ideas, though with more gentleness and concern than judgment. Both had made it clear that Emily would be welcome at the wedding only if she arrived accompanied. Not as a punishment, but because they truly believed showing up alone would be humiliating for her and a source of worry for them. It was a situation with no way out. Going alone meant exposing her loneliness in front of everyone. Not going meant missing the last family gathering with her mother still alive. Emily had tried to explain that she was fine as she was, that she did not need a man to be happy, but her words collided with a way of thinking that could not, or would not, change. That was why she had made the desperate decision to look for a fake boyfriend, someone who could pretend for just one day. Just long enough to give her mother peace of mind and her sister joy. Yet now, standing in front of Michael, confessing all of it, the idea felt more absurd than ever, a clumsy plan born from exhaustion and pressure. Michael fell silent for several seconds that felt endless. His face showed intense concentration, as if he were solving a complex problem in his mind. Emily used that silence to compose herself a little, discreetly wiping her eyes and smoothing her apron with hands that still trembled. She was ready to hear him say that this was her problem and that she needed to solve it without involving the household. Or worse, that she should look for another job if her personal issues were going to interfere with her work. She braced herself for either response, raising inner defenses to protect herself from the rejection she expected. But Michael said none of that. Instead, he looked at her with an expression Emily couldn't quite read. There was something between admiration and sadness, as if he were discovering something in her he had never seen before. He ran a hand along his jaw, a nervous gesture Emily recognized well from having seen him during difficult work calls. Finally, Michael spoke, but not in the way Emily expected. "I understand why this matters to you," he murmured, his voice rough, almost to himself. "No one should be forced to choose between their dignity and their family." Emily looked at him in surprise, unsure how to respond to that unexpected empathy. She had anticipated many reactions, but not such genuine understanding, not that kind of validation that tightened her throat with held-back emotion. "I should let you rest, Mr. Michael. It's late, and tomorrow I have to leave early," Emily said, trying to put an end to a conversation that was becoming too intimate, too dangerous for her already vulnerable heart. She took a step back, looking for an exit. She needed distance from a man who suddenly seemed able to see through all her defenses. Michael nodded, but didn't move, as if there were something else he wanted to say and couldn't quite find the words. Emily took advantage of that hesitation, turned around, and walked quickly toward the stairs leading to her small room at the back of the house. She could feel Michael's gaze following her, but she didn't dare turn around. Something inside her told her that if she did, she would completely fall apart. She climbed the steps quickly, fighting the urge to run, clinging to the last remnants of her professional dignity. Only when she closed the door to her room was she able to breathe again. She dropped onto the small bed, and then the tears came without restraint. She felt exposed and fragile, but also, strangely, relieved to have shared that weight with someone, even if that someone was her wealthy employer, who had probably already forgotten about it and was checking his emails. Emily couldn't know that at that very moment, Michael was still standing in the hallway, staring at the place where she had disappeared. He wore a thoughtful expression that would not leave him all night. Nor could she imagine that her words were planting something in the heart of a man who believed he had forgotten what it felt like to truly live. Michael went up to his room with slow steps. Each stair seemed heavier than the last, as if he were carrying something invisible from that hallway. He entered his spacious bedroom, with a bed that always felt excessive for one person, and sank into the armchair by the window without taking off his shoes. The city shimmered outside with its night lights, indifferent to the small dramas unfolding inside its homes. Michael looked at those lights without truly seeing them. His mind was still trapped in the conversation, in Emily's words repeating over and over. "I need a date for tomorrow." At first, the phrase had sounded desperate and absurd, but now, with all the context, it carried a painful meaning that wouldn't leave him alone. Emily wasn't being capricious. She was trapped between two impossible choices, disappointing her family or betraying herself. And Michael, for reasons he couldn't quite understand, couldn't stop thinking about it. He took off his solid gold watch, a gift he had given himself after closing his first major deal, and placed it on the table without looking at it. That night, the weight of the metal on his wrist had felt like a chain, reminding him of everything he had and everything he lacked. The hours passed with cruel slowness as Michael lay awake in the darkness of his room. His mind wandered down paths he usually avoided. He remembered the last time he had attended an important event, the wedding of a business partner's son 6 months earlier. He had arrived alone, as always, and spent the night smiling politely while dodging uncomfortable questions about his personal life. Older women asked him when he would get married. Men joked about his supposed freedom. He pretended it didn't affect him, that he had chosen that life and was content with his solitude. But the truth, the one that only surfaces during sleepless nights, was very different. Now, after hearing Emily's story, he realized he wasn't the only one trapped in that kind of loneliness. She was pretending too. She was also carrying impossible expectations. The difference was that Emily at least had a family that cared about her, even if they did it in the wrong way. He didn't even have that. Michael got up from the armchair at around 3 in the morning, unable to stay still with so many thoughts circling in his head like trapped birds searching for a way out. He walked to his private study, that refuge where he almost always found calm among numbers and strategies that followed clear logic. But that night, not even the financial reports could hold his focus. His mind returned again and again to Emily, to her broken voice, to the way she tried to preserve her dignity even while confessing her desperation. There was something in that mix of strength and fragility that touched him in a way he hadn't felt in years. He thought about all the times Emily had worked in his house over the past 3 years. Always efficient. Always discreet. Always invisible. He had never asked how her family was doing, whether she needed anything, or if she was happy with her job. He had simply assumed that as long as she did her work well, nothing else mattered. Emily sent money to her family regularly, sacrificing her own life for the well-being of others. She worked long hours to cover medical treatments, first for her father and now with the constant worry about her sick mother. Shame began to wrap around him like a weight he couldn't shake off. The image of Emily asking on the phone for a fake boyfriend for one day wouldn't leave him alone. It followed him through the hallways of his empty house as dawn began to tint the sky with soft colors. He found himself in the kitchen, making coffee he didn't need. His hands moved on their own while his mind shaped an idea that had been born at some point during that sleepless night. It was absurd, reckless, and completely out of character for him. He always calculated every step with precision. Yet the more he thought about it, the more sense it made on a level that wasn't logical, but deeply human. Emily needed a companion for one day. Someone to pretend to be her boyfriend just long enough to calm her family and give peace to her sick mother. And he, Michael, a 45-year-old man who had forgotten what it felt like to do something selfless for another person, could be that someone. He had no plans for that day. In truth, he almost never had plans outside of work. He could put on a suit, drive to wherever the wedding was, pretend to be Emily's attentive boyfriend for a few hours, and then return to his usual life. In theory, it seemed simple. A favor between acquaintances. Nothing extraordinary. But Michael knew it wasn't that simple. Something deeper was pushing him, something tied to his own loneliness and to the need to feel useful, to matter to someone, even if it was only for one fabricated day. The sun was beginning to come through the windows when he heard Emily's footsteps coming down the stairs. She was probably going to prepare breakfast before heading out to take care of her responsibilities. Michael looked at his reflection in the kitchen window and saw a middle-aged man with dark circles under his eyes and messy hair, very different from the polished businessman everyone knew. He wondered if he was about to make the biggest mistake of his life or if, at last, he was doing something right after years of living on autopilot. Emily appeared in the kitchen doorway and stopped when she saw him awake at such an early hour. Her eyes were still swollen from crying. Michael noticed the dark shadows beneath them, a clear sign that she hadn't slept well either. They looked at each other in silence for a moment, heavy with discomfort and unspoken words. Both remembered the conversation from the night before. Both hesitated, unsure how to move forward. Emily spoke first. She murmured a formal good morning as she moved toward the coffee maker, avoiding his gaze. Michael knew he had to speak right then, before he lost his nerve, before daylight erased the clarity he had found in the dark. He opened his mouth and closed it again. The words seemed to get stuck in his throat. Emily kept her back to him, preparing coffee with trembling hands, perhaps wishing he would leave and pretend that nothing had happened the night before. But Michael couldn't leave. Not yet. Not without saying what he had decided at some point between midnight and dawn. He took a deep breath, feeling as if he were about to jump into the void without knowing what awaited him below. Then he found his voice. "Emily," Michael said, his tone firm but gentle. She stopped immediately, the cup frozen halfway to her lips. She turned slowly, her eyes filled with fear. She seemed to expect a reprimand, a warning about mixing personal matters with work. Michael saw that fear and felt a sharp stab of guilt when he realized she saw him only as a distant authority figure, not as someone capable of empathy. That had to change. Even if it was only this once. Even if it was only for one day. Michael walked over to the kitchen table and sat down. It was an unusual gesture for him, someone who normally had breakfast in his study while checking emails and tasks. He motioned for Emily to sit as well, but she gently shook her head, too nervous to accept such unexpected closeness. Michael understood and didn't insist. He respected the boundaries she needed in order to feel safe. He looked at his coffee, now almost cold on the table, as he searched for the right words to express something he didn't fully understand himself. He had spent the entire night thinking about it, building logical and reasonable arguments. Yet now that he had to say it out loud, everything sounded absurd, even inside his own head. Still, something inside him told him that if he didn't speak at that moment, he would regret it for the rest of his life. "I couldn't sleep last night," Michael began, looking straight into her eyes with an honesty he rarely showed. Emily blinked, confused, unsure where the conversation was heading, but too polite to interrupt him. He continued, choosing each word carefully, fully aware that he was about to cross a line he had never crossed with any employee before. "I couldn't stop thinking about what you told me, about your situation with your sister's wedding." Emily tensed immediately. Her knuckles turned white as she gripped the cup harder than necessary. She was probably reproaching herself for the moment she had let her guard down in front of him, bracing herself to hear advice she hadn't asked for or, worse, condescending pity. But Michael had no intention of giving her any of that. He took a deep breath and said something he hadn't even planned to express so clearly. I understand what it's like to go to important events alone and pretend it doesn't matter. I've done it for years. The confession landed between them like a stone dropped into still water. Emily looked at him in surprise, as if she were suddenly seeing a different person behind the expensive suit and the label of a wealthy man. Michael seized that moment of connection and kept speaking before he lost the courage he had gathered throughout that long, sleepless night. I thought a lot about what you said about needing a boyfriend for tomorrow, he continued, noticing how Emily blushed as she heard her own words repeated in his voice. Embarrassment showed in every expression on her face, but Michael didn't stop. He needed to finish before his rational side convinced him that all of this was madness. And I realized something. You shouldn't have to beg strangers or feel ashamed for asking for help. Emily opened her mouth to protest, likely to clarify that she hadn't asked him for help, that the phone call had been private, and that he shouldn't have overheard it. But Michael raised his hand gently, asking her to let him finish, to listen until the end before judging what he was about to say. She closed her mouth and gave a barely perceptible nod. Her entire body was tense, as if preparing for a blow. Michael leaned forward and rested his elbows on the table, adopting an open, approachable posture, as non-intimidating as possible. The next words came out more easily than he had imagined, as if they had been waiting for hours to be spoken. If you still need someone to go with you to the wedding, if you still need that boyfriend for one day, he paused, fully aware that what he was about to say would change something between them in an irreversible way. I can be that person. The silence that followed was absolute. Michael could hear the kitchen clock marking the seconds, each tick echoing like a sharp blow. Emily stood motionless, her expression frozen between shock and confusion, as if the words she had just heard were in a language her mind refused to understand. The coffee cup trembled in her hands, and Michael feared it might fall, but she set it down on the table with stiff movements, never taking her eyes off him. Her mouth opened and closed several times without a sound, as if she couldn't catch her breath. Michael waited patiently, giving her time to process his proposal, fully aware that it must sound absurd and completely unexpected. Finally, Emily managed to speak, though her voice came out broken, heavy with disbelief. "What did you say?" she whispered, as if she didn't trust her own ears and needed to confirm that she had heard him correctly. Michael repeated his offer, this time with greater firmness and conviction, making it clear that it was neither a joke nor a misunderstanding. "I can go with you to your sister's wedding. I can pretend to be your boyfriend for one day. Just one day. Nothing more." Emily slowly shook her head. Her expression shifted from astonishment to distrust, as if years of experience were reminding her that when something sounds too good to be true, it almost never is. "I don't understand," Emily said in a trembling voice, stepping back, as if creating physical distance might help her think more clearly. "Why would you do something like that? It doesn't make sense, Mr. Michael. You don't really know me. I'm just your employee." The words came out fast and defensive, building walls exactly where Michael was trying to create bridges. He understood her reaction. He understood the distrust, because barely 24 hours earlier, he would have reacted the same way. Yet something had changed in him during that sleepless night. Something he couldn't explain logically, but felt with absolute clarity. He stood up slowly, keeping his hands visible, avoiding any sudden movements that might frighten her even more. "You're right," he said. "We don't really know each other. But I know you've worked here for 3 years with dedication and honesty. I know you send money to your family regularly, and I know you're going through a situation that no one should have to face alone." Emily looked at him with eyes filled with moisture, caught between hope and fear, between accepting help and protecting her pride. Michael continued. His voice grew softer, more open, more vulnerable. "I'm not expecting anything in return, Emily. This isn't a business deal or a transaction. It's simply a favor," he paused briefly. "From one lonely person to another." That last sentence left him completely exposed. It revealed a fragility he had never shown to anyone. Emily breathed unevenly. Tears began to slide silently down her cheeks as she absorbed the sincerity in his words. And in that moment, in that kitchen bathed in the soft light of dawn, something essential changed between the lonely wealthy man and his desperate housekeeper. The drive to Emily's hometown in the Texas Hill Country took almost 3 hours, along roads that gradually shifted from smooth pavement to dusty dirt paths. Michael drove his most discreet vehicle, not the sports car he usually used. He followed Emily's nervous directions, while she twisted her hands throughout the entire drive. They had agreed on a simple story. They met when he needed to renovate a property and she recommended good workers from her town. They started talking, went out a few times, and had been together for 6 months. Nothing complicated. Nothing that required memorizing tangled details. Emily had insisted again and again that he didn't have to do this, that she would find another solution. But Michael had remained firm. Now, seeing the nervousness reflected on her face, he wondered if he was truly prepared for what lay ahead. This wasn't just about pretending to be a boyfriend for a few hours. It was about stepping into Emily's private world, meeting her family, becoming part of something intimate and deeply personal. The weight of what he had agreed to began to settle in his stomach like a heavy stone. Even so, when he looked at Emily and saw gratitude mixed with terror in her eyes, he knew he could no longer turn back. She had placed her trust in him. Something valuable and fragile that he could not betray. "We're almost there," Emily murmured, pointing toward a worn sign announcing the name of her town. The family house was humble but warm. It had adobe walls painted in cheerful colors and a small garden full of flowers cared for with devotion. People were everywhere. Uncles, cousins, neighbors. Everyone was wearing their best clothes for the big day. The low hum of conversations and laughter filled the air, mixing with the smell of food being prepared for the celebration. Michael felt the eyes turn toward them the moment they stepped out of the truck. Whispers began immediately at the sight of the elegant, unfamiliar man accompanying Emily. He took her hand instinctively. It was supposed to be just an act, but the gesture felt surprisingly natural. Emily squeezed his hand in return, seeking support, and Michael noticed that she was trembling slightly. Then a woman stepped out of the house. She was thin and pale, but her eyes were bright, full of emotion. Michael didn't need an introduction to know she was Emily's mother. They shared the same expressive eyes and the same way of tilting their heads when nervous. "Mom," Emily said, her voice breaking. She released Michael's hand and hurried toward her, hugging her carefully. Michael watched the scene feeling a tightness in his chest, a mix of tenderness and melancholy he hadn't felt in years. The woman held her daughter with the intensity of someone who knows hugs are limited and that each one matters. After several minutes of tears and caresses, Emily's mother finally pulled back and turned her gaze toward Michael, who waited nearby with respectful distance. Her eyes examined him from head to toe with the sharp attention of a mother who knows her daughter well and can sense a lie from far away. Michael felt a cold shiver run down his spine, but he remained calm. He smiled warmly as Emily made the formal introduction. "Mom, this is Michael, my boyfriend," Emily said. The words didn't come easily, but they sounded firm enough to be believable. Michael instinctively extended his hand, but the woman ignored it and instead pulled him into an unexpected embrace. It was a strong hug for someone so fragile. "Thank you for taking care of my girl," she whispered in his ear, her rough voice heavy with emotion. Michael didn't know what to say. The sincerity of that woman disarmed him completely. When she stepped back, there were tears in her eyes, but also a radiant smile that transformed her tired face into something beautiful. Come in, come in. Sophie is just finishing getting ready. Emily, your sister is going to be so happy to see you." The family immediately gathered around them. They asked questions, offered drinks, spoke all at once. They treated Michael with a warmth he had forgotten existed. Emily glanced at him anxiously, clearly worried that he might feel uncomfortable or out of place. But Michael returned a calm smile and, for the first time in many years, surrounded by strangers in a dusty town, he felt strangely at home. The wedding was joyful and chaotic. There was lively music, abundant food, and non-stop dancing. Michael watched it all with quiet fascination, noticing details he would normally have overlooked at the elegant weddings he was used to. There were no white-gloved servers or expensive champagne, but there was something far more valuable, genuine love in every corner. He watched Emily help Sophie with her veil, adjusting it with steady hands as they both laughed and cried at the same time. He saw her carry her nieces and nephews with natural tenderness. He saw her comfort her mother when emotion overwhelmed her. He saw her dance with her father to a slow song that made half the room cry. Emily wasn't just kind or attentive. She was light concentrated in human form. Every gesture radiated warmth. Every word was filled with sincere affection. Michael found himself unable to look away, mesmerized by this version of Emily he had never seen in the 3 years she had worked in his house. There, she was the discreet and efficient employee. Here, she was the beloved daughter, the protective sister, the favorite aunt, the friend everyone trusted. She was the person that work and necessity had kept hidden, but that her family knew perfectly well. Something painful and unexpected pierced Michael's chest. Shame for building empires while his heart turned into a desert. Shame for needing to come to a humble town to understand what it meant to be alive. During the party, when the music was at its loudest and everyone was dancing without inhibition, Sophie organized a traditional game. When the music stopped, couples had to kiss. Emily looked at Michael with obvious panic. She clearly hadn't anticipated that situation when they planned the charade. He smiled at her with a calm he didn't fully feel and stepped a little closer as the music kept playing. "We just have to make it believable," he murmured near her ear, low enough that only she could hear. Emily nodded stiffly. Her cheeks flushed in a way Michael found unexpectedly charming. The music stopped just as they found themselves face to face, and the cheers of the crowd pushed them toward that inevitable moment. Michael hesitated for a second. He was aware that this crossed a line they hadn't discussed. Then Emily closed her eyes and leaned in slightly. It was a silent permission. The kiss was brief, restrained, almost chaste. Lips against lips, without drama. But it lasted long enough for Michael to feel the world stop. The noise of the party faded away. The people around them blurred, and for an instant that felt eternal, there were only the two of them. When they pulled apart, Emily's eyes were open, looking at him with an expression Michael couldn't interpret. There was surprise, yes, but also something deeper that made his heart beat irregularly. People applauded and whistled, happy to see Emily finally with someone who seemed to make her happy, unaware that it was all an act. But as Michael held the gaze of those golden brown eyes filled with confused emotion, he began to wonder if it was really still just an act. Something had changed in that kiss. Something neither of them was ready to name, but that both could feel hanging in the air, like electricity before a storm. If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to like the video. Remember that small acts of kindness can transform lives in ways we never imagine. The rest of the celebration passed for Michael as if wrapped in a strange fog. Everything seemed different after that kiss. Emily appeared just as affected. She avoided looking at him directly, but stayed close, as was expected of a real couple. They danced together when the family insisted. Their bodies moved with an unexpected synchrony, a closeness that hadn't existed before. Michael was aware of every place where his hand rested on Emily's waist, sensing her warmth through the light fabric of the dress she had chosen for that day. It wasn't an elegant dress by the standards Michael was used to, but it made her beautiful in a simple, authentic way that no designer creation could have achieved. As they turned slowly to the rhythm of a romantic song, Michael dared to look at her directly and found her eyes already fixed on him, watching him with an intensity that took his breath away. In that look there were questions, confusion, and perhaps a bit of fear, but also something softer that Michael didn't dare name. The song ended too soon, and with it that moment of silent connection broke, though the sensation remained suspended in the air between them. Later, when the party began to settle and some guests were leaving, Emily led him to the back garden of the house, seeking a moment of privacy, away from her family's curious eyes. Night had fully fallen, covering the sky in deep black scattered with stars, the kind never seen in the city. Emily hugged herself and looked up, as if searching for answers in those distant lights. Michael stayed by her side in silence, giving her the space she needed to process everything she had lived through that intense day. Finally, she spoke in a voice barely audible above the distant murmur of the music. "I never thought someone like you would do something like this for me." The words were filled with amazement and a restrained emotion that was impossible to hide. Michael turned to look at her and saw how tears shimmered in her eyes without falling. "Someone like me?" he repeated, feeling the weight of that phrase and the social distance she assumed between them. "Emily, I'm not that different from you." She let out a humorless laugh and shook her head as she wiped away a rebellious tear that had escaped. "Of course you are different, Mr. Michael. You live in a big house. You drive cars that cost more than I'll earn in my entire life. You're important, respected, successful. She paused, her voice breaking slightly. And I'm just the woman who cleans your house. Michael felt every word like a direct blow to his chest. They weren't cruel, but they revealed how deep the gap Emily saw between them. A distance he himself had built with his professional coldness and measured indifference over 3 years. He took a step toward her, reducing the physical space, even though he still didn't know how to close the emotional one. You're right about the money and the house, he admitted with an honesty that was almost painful. But that doesn't make me important or successful in what truly matters. Today I saw something I've never had. What did you see? Emily asked, finally turning to look at him directly, searching for his eyes in the darkness of the garden. Michael took a deep breath, preparing himself for a vulnerability he hadn't shown in decades. I saw a woman surrounded by people who truly love her. I saw how your mother looks at you as if you were her greatest treasure. How your sister looks for you to share every important moment. How your nieces and nephews run toward you because they know they'll find open arms. His voice grew heavier as he continued. I saw light, Emily. I saw what it means to have a real family. Not just people who show up to your events because it's convenient for business. He paused, struggling with words he had never spoken out loud. I'm 45 years old and I have a bank account I could never spend in a lifetime, but I have no one waiting for me at home. No one who worries about whether I arrived safely or if I ate dinner. No one who truly cares. Emily looked at him differently now. The imagined distance between them began to dissolve in the face of such a raw confession. She timidly reached out and touched Michael's arm in a gesture of comfort that was pure reflection of who she was, always thinking of others even while processing her own pain. I care, she said softly. The words fell between them with unexpected weight. Michael looked at her in surprise, searching for any sign of simple politeness, but what he found was absolute sincerity. Every morning, when I come downstairs to make your breakfast, I wonder if you slept well, if something is worrying you. Every time you work late, I leave food ready, hoping you'll at least eat before going to bed. She smiled sadly. Maybe I'm not family, but I do care. More than I should. That last sentence was barely a whisper, an involuntary admission that neither of them expected, and that changed everything. The silence that followed was charged with possibilities that were both terrifying and exciting. The drive back home was completely different from the drive there. Inside the truck settled a thick silence, full of unspoken thoughts and emotions neither of them yet knew how to handle. Emily looked out the window at the dark landscape rushing past, her hands intertwined on her lap, a posture that revealed her nervousness. Michael kept his eyes on the road, but his mind was miles away, replaying everything that had happened over the last 24 hours. They had crossed too many invisible lines. They had shared vulnerabilities that couldn't be ignored once they returned to their usual routine. The kiss during the game still echoed in Michael's mind with an intensity that unsettled him. Not because it had been bad, but precisely because it had been too good, too real. And then there was the conversation in the garden, those shared confessions that had exposed deep parts of both of them in a way neither had anticipated. Emily had become real, whole, impossible to ignore. Thank you, Emily suddenly said, breaking the silence that had stretched for almost an hour on the road. Her voice sounded small inside the closed space of the truck, nearly drowned out by the constant hum of the engine. Michael turned his head slightly to look at her, then returned his gaze to the road. You don't have to thank me, he replied sincerely. And he meant it. He wasn't looking for gratitude for something he had done as much for himself as for her. Emily shook her head, insisting. Yes, I do. What you did today, pretending to be my boyfriend, meeting my family, enduring all their questions, her voice cracked slightly. You gave my mother a day of peace. I saw her smile in a way I hadn't seen in months. That has no price. Michael felt a pressure in his chest, a strange mix of satisfaction and sadness. He had managed to help her, but now he had to face an uncomfortable truth. Everything had been temporary. Borrowed. Fundamentally false, no matter how real it had felt. Your mother is an incredible woman, Michael said, searching for safer ground, something that wouldn't force them to confront all at once what was hanging between them. It's clear how much she loves you. Emily smiled sadly and wiped away a tear she hadn't managed to hold back. She's always wanted the best for me. That's why it hurt her so much to see me alone, working so far away. Today she was able to believe that I'm okay, that there's someone taking care of me. She paused meaningfully. Even if it was just a lie. The word fell between them like shattering glass. It reminded them of the truth they had been avoiding. Everything had been an act. A favor. Nothing more. Michael tightened his grip on the steering wheel, feeling the urge to contradict her, to tell her that maybe not everything had been a lie, that something real had been born inside that fiction. But he didn't. With what right could he complicate her life? She was his employee. She lived in his house. She depended on her salary. Any misplaced word could be interpreted as an abuse of power. The rest of the drive passed in a dense silence, broken only by occasional directions. When they finally arrived at the house, it was already past midnight. Michael parked the truck in the garage, and both of them stayed seated for a few moments, unmoving. Neither wanted to be the first to break that fragile bubble that had wrapped around them during the drive. In the end, Emily unfastened her seatbelt and opened the door. She stepped out with slow movements, exhausted in body and soul. Michael followed her, walked around the vehicle, and stood in front of her under the dim light of the garage. Emily looked at him with shining eyes, clearly struggling with something she wanted to say. "Mr. Michael," she began formally, and that title immediately created a distance they both felt. "What happened today? What took place?" She stopped, searching for the words. "I will never forget it. It was the most special day I've had in years." Michael felt those words like an early closing, as if she were carefully storing that memory before it could turn into something more. "I won't forget it either," he admitted hoarsely. "Because today something changed in me." Emily looked at him in surprise, her eyes wide, shaken by the intensity of his tone, by that unfiltered emotion. He took a step toward her, shortening the distance, aware that he might be making a huge mistake, yet unable to stop himself. "I realized that I've been living halfway, Emily. Functioning like a machine. Existing, but not truly living." He took a deep breath. "Today, for the first time in years, I felt completely alive. Not because I was at an elegant party or closing an important deal, but because I was with you, seeing the world through your eyes, being part of something genuine." Emily breathed unevenly. Tears ran silently down her cheeks as she absorbed his words. "I don't know what all of this means," Michael continued, now almost in a whisper. "I don't know how to handle it without ruining it, but I do know I can't pretend today didn't happen, that I didn't feel what I felt. It was heavy with fear and possibility, with hope and uncertainty tangled together." Emily opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she spoke in a trembling but steady voice. "I can't pretend it didn't happen either. But I need time to understand what was real and what was just part of the game we were playing." The days that followed the wedding were strange and tense in Michael's house. Emily kept her usual routine. She cooked, cleaned, organized every space just as she had for years. Yet there was a subtle difference in every gesture. She avoided staying in the same room as Michael any longer than strictly necessary. Their conversations were limited to professional matters, and the warmth that had existed between them, even if only for an instant, seemed to have cooled into an uncomfortable ice. Michael noticed everything. Every evasive glance. Every excuse to leave the room when he entered. Every silence loaded with unspoken words. He didn't blame her for needing distance. He understood that what had happened between them was complex and confusing. Still, that didn't make it hurt any less to see her build walls where open windows had once existed. He didn't even know exactly what he felt. He only knew that something essential had changed and that he could no longer go back to being the same. The numbers in his financial reports stopped holding his interest the way they used to. Business meetings felt empty, mechanical, without purpose. Everything seemed gray and meaningless compared to that bright day in Emily's hometown. He caught himself waiting to hear her footsteps. Looking for excuses to run into her in the kitchen while she prepared dinner. Finding absurd reasons to ask her trivial questions just to hear her voice. 1 week after the wedding, Michael came downstairs for breakfast and found Emily waiting for him in the dining room, standing with a rigid posture that immediately put him on alert. There was something in her expression. A mix of determination and sadness that Michael recognized as the announcement of bad news. He sat down slowly. He felt his stomach tighten as Emily remained standing, twisting her hands nervously. "Mr. Michael, I need to talk to you about something important." He nodded, mentally preparing himself for what was coming, even though part of him already knew. Emily took a deep breath before continuing. I've decided it's best to stop working here. I'm going to resign." The words landed like a silent explosion in the dining room. Michael felt the impact physically, as if he'd been punched in the stomach and had the air knocked out of him. He had anticipated the possibility, but hearing it out loud made it painfully real. He opened his mouth to protest, to ask why, but she kept speaking before he could form a single word. "It's not because of you," Emily hurried to clarify, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "You've been a good employer. More than good. What you did for me at my sister's wedding was more than anyone had ever done for me." She paused, visibly fighting her emotions. "But precisely because of that, I need to leave." Michael listened, his heart racing. "I need distance to understand what I truly feel," she continued. "To separate gratitude from everything else. To know whether what I felt that day was real or just part of the performance. I can't stay here confused, feeling this way while working for you." Her voice grew firmer. "It isn't fair to either of us. It isn't professional, and it isn't healthy." She was right. Michael knew it. But knowing didn't make it any easier to accept. The idea of losing her, of her simply disappearing from his life, filled him with a panic he hadn't felt in years. Still, he respected her need for clarity. For space to think without the constant pressure of his presence. "When would you leave?" Michael asked hoarsely. The words scraped his throat. Emily blinked, surprised that he wasn't trying to convince her to stay. "In 2 weeks, if that works for you. I'll give you time to find someone else." 2 weeks to get used to the idea of living in that house without her. To return to the silence that had been his only companion before Emily filled it with her quiet presence. Michael nodded slowly, accepting the inevitable. "All right. I understand your decision." He stood up and walked toward the window, unable to look at her while he spoke, while he said more than he probably should have. "But I want you to know something, Emily. What I felt that day at the wedding, what I feel now, isn't confusion or misplaced gratitude." He turned to face her, letting her see the unfiltered truth in his eyes. "It's real. And I don't know how to handle it because it's been a very long time since I felt anything real." Emily looked at him with tear-filled eyes, breathing unevenly. "Even so, I respect your need for distance," he continued. "I hope you find the answers you're looking for." The silence that followed was a painful goodbye, full of words never spoken and possibilities fading away. The days that followed moved with torturous slowness. Emily continued to do her work, but there was a palpable sadness in every movement, a sadness Michael felt like a constant ache in his chest. When they crossed paths in the kitchen, they ate in silence. They wished each other good morning and good night with a formality that hurt more than any argument. They carefully avoided any conversation that might lead them into dangerous emotional territory. Michael buried himself in work, trying not to think about the mercilessly approaching date, the day Emily would walk out that door and perhaps never return. But nights were the worst. When he was alone with his thoughts and the silence of the house, that emptiness showed him, brutally, what his life would be like without her forever. 1 week after that conversation, Michael made a decision. He couldn't let her go without trying something, without at least telling her with complete honesty what she meant to him. If after that Emily still decided to leave, at least he wouldn't carry the regret of unspoken words. With his heart pounding, he sought her out one afternoon and asked if they could talk, not as employer and employee, but as two people who had shared something meaningful. Emily agreed, with a mix of hope and fear in her eyes, and they arranged to meet the next day at a small coffee shop, neutral ground, far from the house that complicated everything. Michael arrived at the coffee shop half an hour early. He was too nervous to wait at home. He chose a table in a corner, offering some privacy without hiding completely. He ordered a coffee that went cold in front of him while he waited, unable to take a single sip. His hands trembled slightly, something that never happened to him, not even in the most important negotiations. But this was different. This was infinitely more important than any major business deal. When Emily walked through the door, looking beautiful in a simple dress, Michael felt his heart leap. She spotted him immediately and walked toward him with slow steps, her expression revealing that she was just as nervous. She sat down across from him without a word, her hands intertwined on the table, waiting for him to begin the conversation they both knew could change everything. Michael took a deep breath, gathering the courage he had built over days of reflection. He had rehearsed this moment 100 times in his mind, but now that he was there, all those prepared phrases vanished, leaving him with nothing but the bare truth of his heart. "Emily, the day of your sister's wedding was the most real day of my life," Michael began, his voice heavy with emotion he no longer tried to hide. She looked at him steadily, her eyes bright with tears that refused to fall. He continued, letting the words flow with an honesty he had never shown before. "For 45 years, I lived chasing success, accumulating money, building an empire I thought would make me happy. But it was all empty, superficial, without real meaning." He paused, searching her gaze. "Until I saw you that day, taking care of your mother, hugging your sister, being light for everyone around you. That's when I understood I had been searching in the wrong places, valuing the wrong things." Emily let out a restrained sob and quickly wiped her tears. Michael extended his hand across the table, stopping just short of touching her, giving her the choice to accept or reject the gesture. "I'm not asking you to come back and work in my house," he said firmly. "I don't want you to be my employee ever again." Emily looked at him, confused, not fully understanding where he was going. Her hand moved almost without thinking and met his halfway across the table. Their fingers intertwined with a natural ease that contrasted with all the tension of the previous days. Michael felt that contact like a surge running through his body, giving him the final push to say what he needed to say. "I'm asking you to give me the chance to truly get to know you, without the complication of being your employer, without that power dynamic that made everything harder." His voice softened, almost vulnerable. "I want to invite you to dinner as two people who are getting to know each other. I want to ask you about your dreams, your fears, the things that make you laugh. I want you to know me too, not as the distant wealthy man, but as Michael, a man who has been alone for far too long and who found something special with you." Emily was openly crying now, gripping his hand as if it were an anchor. "I don't know if what we feel is love or if it can turn into love with time," Michael admitted, "but I know I want to try, and I know I want to give you everything you deserve." "I felt something that day too," Emily confessed, her voice trembling but clear. "At first I thought it was just gratitude, or the emotion of the moment, the performance accidentally becoming real." She smiled through her tears, a radiant smile that transformed her face. "But during these days apart, I realized I missed you. Not just as my employer, but as a person. I missed our short conversations in the kitchen, the way you smile when you like the food, how you stay working late because you're passionate about what you do." She paused, gathering courage for her own confession. "I realized I had started falling in love with you long before the wedding, in those small moments when you were kind for no reason, when you let your humanity show behind the expensive suit." Michael's eyes filled with tears. Emotion overwhelmed him completely. "When you kissed me during the game, something woke up inside me. And that night in the garden, when we shared our fears, I knew it was already too late to protect my heart." Emily smiled more brightly, sadness giving way to a shining hope. Michael stood up, walked around the table, and knelt in front of her without caring about the curious looks from other customers. He took her hands in his and looked at her with an intensity that revealed everything he felt. "Emily, I don't know how to do this properly because I've never truly done it before, but I want to try. I want to be the man you deserve, the one who takes care of you the way you take care of everyone else." His voice broke. "Would you give me the chance to love you for real? Not for a single borrowed day, but for all the days that come after." Emily nodded firmly as tears streamed freely down her face. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I want to try with you." Michael stood up, gently pulled her toward him, and kissed her, releasing all the emotion that had built up during days of forced distance. That kiss had nothing to do with acting. It was sincere, intense, and full of promise. When they pulled apart, both were smiling through tears, aware that they were beginning something new, frightening, and wonderful. They spent the rest of the afternoon in that small coffee shop talking about everything and nothing, getting to know each other for the first time without roles or masks. 2 years later, at an intimate wedding surrounded by both of their families, Michael and Emily said "I do," filled with true love. Emily's mother was there, smiling brightly, having lived long enough to see her daughter truly happy. As they exchanged vows, they both knew that sometimes a single unexpected day with the right person can become the beginning of a love that lasts a lifetime. Because true love only needs two hearts willing to try together. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more stories. Remember, it's never too late to open your heart, and the best stories begin when you least expect them. May God bless your path and send you someone who lights up your darkest days, just as Michael and Emily lit up each other's. Until the next story.